So, welcome everyone, and today we're going to be discussing blueprints and false memories as they constitute society itself, and the idea that society perhaps is a stage performance of reoccurring blueprints, reoccurring scripts. And today we have Armunn Righ, who is a very good friend, and he is a proponent of this conception of society and the system we see at play. And so we're going to explore this topic, and hopefully we're going to elucidate what I would consider probably one of the greatest secrets never quite told within our mainstream, but nonetheless is something that I think is of crucial importance to realise. So without further ado, hello Armunn.
Hey man, all the formality.
Exactly, yeah.
It's like we've never talked before, huh?
Yeah, it is.
Man.
So to begin our discussion, firstly we'll define a few terms. So you utilise this term, which I find very interesting, fascinating, and quite frankly precise as well, the false memories. How do you see that? Firstly, how do you define that? And then secondly, how do you see that factoring in to the creation of societies?
Yeah. Well, a false memory is basically the background, like consider it a pool from where behavior draws water from, right? So it's something that is considered as a background truth. It could be an event. It could be a belief about how something works or what something is. It could be even a belief about the self. I am this or I am that. But it always works in a way that defines the behavior, the decisions made by the mental character. If, let's say, the ego, which is the decision center and the observer, is awakened in the mind and functioning there in the mind, usually false memories have a harder time establishing themselves because a constant evaluation is performed by that function, let's say, of the psyche. That's why in societies we see a constant preoccupation with maintaining the level of the psyche at the lowest possible rung, if you like, right? If you can put people always stuck in a mental character level where they will only look at the immediate reality around them, they will externalize this decision center instead of internalizing it. So instead of using their inner authority, let's call it like that, their inner decision center, they use an external decision center, which will be news, experts, scientists, religious, priests, whatever it is, that, is in accordance to their culture at the time. If they do that, of course, they follow a story that then we can go into the blueprints afterwards, but they follow a story that is based on that false memories or a set of false memories, right? It can be more than one, and certainly is more than one. And some are built upon each other, like you can have a false memory that requires a previous false memory. So a belief that requires a previous belief, and both are false because they are built merely on an illusionary premise, right? So society can more easily be built and steered towards whatever direction by using these background beliefs and techniques. Of course, religion has used this all the time, and it's basically one of its initial and even base premises, foundational premises, I mean. Anything that uses religious thought, like science nowadays, although initially science could be seen as a break away from religious thought, it actually replaced religion. It has its set of dogmas, which are false memories. It has its priests and its indoctrination system and so on and so forth. So you can steer the population through the belief that is running in the background. You change the belief, you change the behavior. Because every decision made by the mental character, which we can view, metaphorically speaking, as a sort of organic AI, it behaves like an AI. That is why it's so prevalent and important nowadays to look at AI, not from the point of view of, this, whether it's good or bad, or it's a threat or it's not, but from the point of view of comparing how the AI works with how the mental character works. Because mental characters like an AI require a prompt, and it should be a prompt given by the ego. That is the healthy way for the mental character to work, is to be prompted by the ego to perform a task. But usually what you see is that the mental character is prompted from the outside, by a news report, by a politician, by a priest, whatever it is, right? And so by these prompts, you generate behaviors that are basically routines, programmed routines that come and drink from that false memory pool. I don't know if I was clear enough, but if you have any doubts about that.
No, absolutely. Spot on. So it's essentially, the way I've understood it as well, and I've noted it down here, is that false memories are essentially collectively constructed and individually adopted distorted beliefs and fabricated narratives that mask the ego's true nature or the ego's true essence. Yes?
Yeah, it could be defined like that. It doesn't necessarily need to mask. It only needs for the mental character, at the very least, not to pay attention to the inner ego, the inner authority. But yes, that definition works. Yes.
And so these are a prerequisite to the blueprints and to the script. It's almost a way to bring the actor into the role that they will be playing. And if the false memory itself, I think I stated when we were in Portugal, the way I succinctly understood it was that the false memory is essentially the meme that generates that false character. And so they are a prerequisite to the blueprint and the script in that sense. And this of course brings us quite nicely on to blueprints. How do you conceptualize the blueprints, and what mechanism? Even that may be a bit of a complex topic. We can get into that later. But what mechanism allows them to recur? Why do we have this repetition of blueprints? In your opinion?
Well, the reason for the repetition is, and this is just my speculation, I don't have access to their manual, but I think that the reason for the repetition, starting with that point, is because it worked in the past, on one hand. So, if you have a method that works, why change it? The second is because it somehow matches something organic that is supposed to occur. Let me try to, conjure up an example here, a metaphorical example. So imagine that, from time to time, there comes a period of time where people are more prone to rebellion, for example. Okay, it would be a natural time for people to reevaluate the structures that they've gotten used to, and we're talking about an organic time. Okay, so if you put a story over it, and you control both sides of a rebellion, so you control the state, let's say, and you control the rebels, you play out a theater story, a theatrical performance that will steer the attention from each individual within that society towards one of the sides, therefore missing the chance for whatever organic rebellion could occur at that period in time. So in that missed chance, this does not mean that the organic will forever be lost. What happens there is that in a way, that organic period was rejected, right? And by being rejected, it will not completely disappear. It will build up in the background like any shadow would. So that organic period of time that would organically cause the reevaluation of the structures will then build up power and try continuously to come through, right? So I think the cyclicality of these theater performances on the world stage, by politicians and etc., media, and so on and so forth, and even before the media was as prevalent as it is now, it still occurred, is somehow to try to always delay, like pushing forward in time, like gaining time, right? For whatever organic energy was building up there. Because I think that, you can, if I can use a sort of another biological metaphor is, you can hold your pee only for so long, and you can delay, but eventually there comes a time when you got to go, right? So in a sort of metaphorical way, what the blueprints try to do is pretend that you have peed to give you this satisfaction that, I don't need to go, but actually biologically, you still need to go. You still have your bladder full, so you will eventually need to go, or the bladder will burst and you'll have a serious problem.
It's quite the metaphor, but absolutely apt. Yeah, it's so essentially what you're saying is, like any stage performance, the director, the playwright, utilizes a dialectical structure, the thesis, antithesis, and then of course the synthesis. But the synthesis in this sense is almost a microcosmic reflection of what would occur macrocosmically or organically. So they create these artificial resolutions, these various world ages and what have you. That provides, a bit like the P scenario metaphor, it provides artificial relief. It vents some of the pressure from the system, but there's almost an accumulation, like what you're saying, of that shadow essence of the organic trying to get, back, trying to take its place once again. That, of course, can only be outrun for so long. So that this would tie into the concept that they create these artificial resets, but there appears to be every so often a mass organic reset. So we almost get to the idea of a cycle within a cycle, maybe, as well.
Yes, and if you can, the best way to plan the delay of that organic occurrence would be to pretend that your current cycle, your current time, has a continuous timeline all the way to the, ancient past, right? So you have to sort of provide also a background story that covers, millions of years, and that's basically what Darwin's theory did in one hand. And you have in religions such as Buddhism, Hinduism, and so on, this idea also of the world ages and of, the evolution has been going on. The evolution of the soul has been going on for millions and millions of years, and even more. They call it the kalpas and so on. But anyway, so these ideas are put there to provide a legitimacy to the current time. So if you look around and you see a certain story in your social setting, a story that regulates, a story or a set of stories that regulates your current setting. I am Portuguese, I have this history for my people behind me, the cultural setup is this, the language is that, the way we, prepare food and etc. All of these things are given legitimacy by the tradition. You often hear these this word, spoken as if it was a mantra, which is tradition, as if those traditions, just even if they were truly ancient, had somehow a legitimacy. So if it was done all the time, it means that they were all the time correct. No, not necessarily. But at the same time, you have to provide an opposition to this tradition, right? Because that will emerge naturally. The organic is continuously trying to show the intervenients that it's all bollocks, basically, as you would say in Britain. And to be able to vent that a little bit, you provide an opposition, and you shorten the time where you allow this stage play to be enacted. Because if you provide a smaller cycle, you reduce the chances of anything unexpected organically to come through. If you allow a play, imagine one thing. You have, a football match that you want to control, right? So a football match would be 90 minutes. You can control 90 minutes. But if you extend that football match to, 4 hours, a lot can happen, right? A lot unexpected can happen. You can't enact and predict and produce a result in the same way that you could over just 90 minutes, right? So it's the same way. It's like, there is a cycle that is going on that certainly takes longer, but they do these smaller cycles while pretending that the cycle is way bigger. So I can say, for example, Age of Aquarius, right? And usually Age of Aquarius or these ages are defined as 2,100 and something, right, years. But if you can do that in 200 years, right, and you sort of write the background story saying that it's 2,000, right, you give legitimacy to your claim, you give tradition. You can say, oh, this is a very ancient idea that even the, ancient Greeks and the Hindus and so on were talking about. And in fact, it was something that is much more recent and that has the intention of producing a smaller reset, a venting reset that allows you to gain a bit more time, delay the organic a bit more, so that you can then, have a bit longer in power. But yes, like you stated, inevitably it will have to be confronted later on.
I have to admit that the idea of the shorter cycles and the way you describe it, it does make quite a bit of sense. Where you're quite rightly stating that if you have these shorter cycles, you lower the potential for unpredictable elements, or of course the organic elements to resurface. And this of course occurs with any system. Any system, of course, it's not legitimate, it's legitimized. Like what you were stating, and the legitimation itself is the rationalization of what is fundamentally absurd. For example, look at the European royalty, right? You've basically got a bunch of inbreds running about in frock coats and very strange looking pompous garb with gold orbs and scepters. It makes absolutely no sense if you were to look at it without, just through a neutral, impartial lens, without the false memories, without the legitimation of it. And so I do agree that from my standpoint now, it appears as though the cycles are shorter for the reasons you've given. Longer cycles, there's more that of course could go wrong. I want to get into this idea that you bring up as well regarding the tower blueprint, and you have other, you've categorized and designated with specific terms other blueprints as well, the Holy Land blueprint, for example. But focusing on the tower blueprint, how do you envision that? How do you conceptualize that? How would you define it or describe it?
Well, the tower blueprint, of course, it's defined in the Bible, in that particular passage where, the tower is being built and Yahweh sends the angels down to confuse the languages and prevent it, because that would be a threat. But these two sides of that blueprint, that is a story that is applied upon society, there is one side always that promotes the restraint, so the closure of society onto itself. So, we could call it nationalism, for example. And there is always a side that promotes the externalization, so the expansion of and the opening of the culture to the outside. We could call it internationalism. So the Tower of Babel side in this dichotomy is the side that internationalizes. So it tries to unite or globalize it. It's what is called the globalism. Tries to globalize, even though it may, of course, not be a globe, but it makes it worldwide, tries to promote the idea of a unification of the world and unification of the cultures and so on and so forth, while the other side tries to, and when I say tries, is of course scripted, to promote the maintenance of the separation. And this is observable in all cultures and across several periods of time, even in our lifetimes. And recently I have been in touch with a Japanese live streamer that I will invite soon, very soon, to, in fact, he's been invited and he will participate in the prognosis. And he has found, interestingly, that this same motion, let's say, of two sides, one playing the opening of Japan, the other one playing the traditionalism and closing of Japan, has been going on for quite some time as well, including the writing of history of Japan that couldn't possibly have happened in the way they described, and even fabricating evidence for it. So this occurs in all cultures, and of course nowadays we are confronted with the easy verification of this, where you see an obvious globalism going on with the unifying language, in this case English, which coincides with also the language that is used as a basis for the programming language of computers and of AI, which leads me to believe that the scenario being played out in that script for the side of the globalists is the AI god. So that would be equivalent to Nimrod in the biblical blueprint. So the AI would be equivalent to Nimrod eventually, and would have this language, the language of AI, English, and not only English, but AI itself as a language that unifies all cultures, to be, building this metaphorical tower. Of course, it does not need to be a physical tower, although a symbolic tower can be built eventually. Like, imagine a scenario where, several governments got together, the United Nations, and decided to build a tower in commemoration of the friendship of peoples, whatever. This can easily be seen on the world stage. But nonetheless, the idea is to build that metaphorical tower where all the peoples of the world come together under one leadership, one banner, and one language, and of course one set of acceptable false memories. The other side of the equation, although it is appealing to think that this is an organic rebellion, are also controlled, and they are part of that faction that is shown in the biblical blueprint as belonging to Yahweh, that sends down the angels to confuse the languages and maintain the power, let's say, of the traditional Yahweh deity. So In this scenario, what I see play out, and this is merely speculation, of course, but we're in speculation field here, is that if we follow that blueprint the way it goes, we will see that globalism eventually will suffer a serious problem. Just about when they are going to, complete that tower scenario, they will come into some sort of problem that, given that it involves AI, that it involves, therefore, computers, data centers, and so on, I envision that the most likely or the most efficient way to cut that off would be through some sort of blackout, being a blackout only of the communication infrastructures, or a complete blackout in terms of actual electricity. I don't know. But that would certainly produce not only, enough of separation between the languages, quote unquote, but also a big, huge trauma for populations that, of course, have grown used to having these tools and having this common language and having contact with people from around the world. So I would see that as most likely what might be used, but this is mere speculation at this point. Of course, we're just hashing out ideas here. So,
well, that would create the Dark Age, and we were discussing something similar as well in the Tower, in our analysis of the Tower tarot card. And even with the Tower concept, and you see this interestingly with what we're seeing currently in the economic transition in the West, where you're getting this subscriber model, and what this is ultimately doing is sapping the surplus value and the disposable income people have for, of course, building families. Is, of course, if you're earning, I don't know, X amount per month, and you've got all of these, subscriber model type products that you've got, that you're essentially renting, be it a car, I don't know, even rent itself, the house, you've got Netflix, whatever it may be. All of this amounts up and basically saps your income every month. You turn into essentially an economic unit, and we were discussing this as well in Portugal. Everything in society, even down to basic human interaction, social interaction, is being economized, essentially, and you're getting what is termed an inshitification of everything, of all services, and of course of the social experience itself. So society is losing its luster to people, and it's similar to how we could conceptualize that in the form of the Tower. Eventually the Tower needs a top. It will reach either a top, a threshold, a ceiling, or of course if it's in a conical shape, it will reach a point where all of the lines and angles converge. And interestingly, we have the lingua franca of the world, English, the people of the angles, right? The crooked folk, you could say, and by and large, the English or the British are seen as that because of obviously our imperial past. But it's interesting that was chosen as the lingua franca. But I don't know if you have a comment upon that.
Well, I don't think it was chosen. I think it was made to be. I think English was produced, manufactured, crafted to be exactly that language. That's why, when we listened to that episode about Shakespeare that I presented to you when you were here, we talked about that, how English clearly, there was an English before Shakespeare, supposedly, and we're talking here historical records that may not be necessarily accurate, but that was put there, right? And there's an English after Shakespeare. And of course, Shakespeare himself is already a character in the world stage, clearly manufactured, like Mozart and some other of these, or plenty of other of these heroes and geniuses, impossible geniuses, I would say. And so I think that English was from the start crafted to be that language. It has, of course, influences from Germanic, from French, from Latin, other languages, but it was put together, and even from, like you've noted, from Hebrew, right? So it was clearly, in my opinion, crafted with the objective of being that lingua franca now, and also to be grammatically compatible with computer programming. I think that that was essential in the crafting of this language. If you note how computer code is set up, you see that it's basically the same and it's comparable to the language used in religious ritual, for example, right? There is repetition, and there is a sort of invocation of what the action should be if something happens, right? And so it seems to me that it was carefully studied, or maybe even not studied recently, but it exists for several resets ago, several cycles ago. But it clearly was manufactured to perform several functions that would enable it to be an efficient means of not only communication, but also programming. It is a language of programming, and that is why I think it's so prevalent, and of course it is the unifying language. And sooner or later, well, not to make predictions, but sooner or later, I think it will be the basically the only language left.
So I told that's a very interesting idea regarding even, for example, what we see in the Tower of Babel mythology, and of course you see it in other similar myths. Interestingly, there's a tower myth, a Tower of Babel myth within the Popol Vuh of the Mayans. So it's something that's cross-cultural, and it appears as though within all of these myths, perhaps the reason, like what you've given, for the unitary language, and of course it also mentions that they were of one mind, not just one language, but of one mind. It lends credence to this idea that perhaps the one language was chosen to facilitate programmatic languages, programmatic code taking over society and the services and the functionalities, or the functionality rather of society. And the one mind as well almost links to this concept that you're seeing with, I think they call it AI psychosis and such, where individuals are beginning to almost deify AI as the new god. And it appears that is what AI is being set up to become. Of course, our previous god, once the religious god idea died, post-Enlightenment era, we then enthroned, deified, apotheosized money. And now money is being moved to its digital, into a digital domain, where the god itself shall be this divine superintelligence. And it's interesting because even Darwinian evolution ties in with this, because we're beginning to see the I guess you would call them the main proponents of AI and the developers of AI and the proliferators of it. A lot of them are actually quite misanthropic. So they talk about these ideas that AI will enter that point of singularity. It will become firstly an artificial general intelligence, then later a super intelligence. So it will become almost God itself, and then we will look towards this new God. And then, of course, they mention that, of course, human beings will be completely obsolete once this occurs. And it screams to me as though they're attempting to, or they have this idea that they want to escape from the egg, if you will, to break the shell, almost like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, where Charlie and Wonka go into the glass elevator and break through the glass ceiling. So it almost screams of that, like they're trying to outrun the organic cycles, perhaps.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think the actual organic cycle takes longer, but of course they run the smaller cycles in order to gain time, and by doing that they inflate this shadow balloon, metaphorically, of rejected power that will eventually need to burst out. But yes, what they try to do is really try to delay as much as possible for their own benefit, what they consider to be benefit. But in fact, I think because they are made up of shadow themselves, they are made up of rejection themselves. And so eventually they will, it's a concept that I have touched upon sometimes, is that some mental characters need to be defeated. They actually want to be defeated. They actually require this defeat. And this is not particular to the people running the show at this moment, like the Wizard of Oz, but also, among us. Because if you hold on to false memories, regardless, and even looking away and turning your back on evidence and on, the obvious faults with those false memories, and you refuse to reevaluate them, what you're actually doing is saying to yourself, this story is much more important to me because of my identification with it than the truth is. And so, although we are not as minds equipped to know all the truth, that is my opinion, by turning away from the opportunity to explore it and to reach it, we are turning away from our organic selves and reinforcing an identification that will just make us automatons and characters in someone else's story. So we ourselves, some of us at least, will need to be defeated, will need to come to a point where there's no more escape from the harsh reality of all of this buildup, Because, again, I say, it's easy to say, oh, they did this, right? It's easy to say that they sold us all this falsehood and systems and so on and so forth. That is correct. They sold. But for anyone that sells, there's someone that buys, right? And so a lot of us really not only bought, but made it theirs. They incorporated it. They contributed to it. And I'm saying willingly contributed to it. And reinforced the falsehood systems for what is perceived their own benefit. Their own direct, immediate benefit. And so there are a lot of people on both sides. There are a lot of people on both sides that will need to reach a point of defeat to actually be able to get a chance, get an opportunity to reevaluate things. Whether they do it or not, it's up to each individual, but I think that is inevitable.
Yes, I think as well, like what you're seeing in the modern day, and you were mentioning this, that there's almost like what we've mentioned previously with monsters, and the etymology of that, monere, to literally remind someone, so that the monsters want to be seen, the shadows want to be seen, and I think as well, we're beginning to see that in the modern day, especially in the West. You're having this real crisis of identity, and perhaps even conscience as well, in certain ideological senses. But you're beginning to see that nationalism is well, it's totally dwindled, of course, but nationalism is beginning to what would the word be? It's beginning to rear its ugly head in a certain sense, it's beginning to lash out. But I see as well that as we're going into this, and I guess we're in the Tower Blueprint right now, we're in the throes of it, as we're beginning to go through this Tower Blueprint, perhaps in the latter stages of it, people are beginning to abandon that nationalism, abandon that sense of nationalism. It's going more towards a brand nationalism, in a sense, corporate nationalism. And it's an interesting transition we see. But when you look at this from a grander vantage point, like what you're stating, patriotism, nationalism itself, the nations themselves are in fact artificial, are they not? They're artificial mental characters.
Yeah. It reminds me of a conversation I had many years ago. This was maybe 20 years, maybe less, I don't know. But around that time ago, that where I was talking with someone from New York, and this person was telling me how her life in the 60s was amazing, was impressive, was incredible, was, like heaven on earth. And this was her memory of, New York in the 60s. And I tried to tell her, but, your memory of it can be good. I mean, I'm sure you had a good time in the 60s, but these systems were already there in the 60s, these relationships of power, the lies, the falsehood, the systems of control, everything was already in place. It was in place from an opposite point of view, perhaps, not yet fully visible in terms of the Tower of Babel globalism like we see now, but it was in place from the opposite side. There was really no difference in the, if you compare a communist with a nationalist, one is promotes the same internally, the other one promotes the same structure externally, so internationally. It's the same thing, basically. That is why I think it's called National Socialism and the other one is called International Socialism. But, and so the systems were already in place. Of course, when we are faced with one of the sides of the story seeming to win, it's like when you're watching a movie, right? Or you're watching a football match, right? And one of the sides is winning. Of course, you tend to sympathize perhaps with the other side and say, oh, this has gone too far on this direction. Maybe the other guy was entirely right. The other guy is perhaps the good guy. There are no good guys here. This is all a stage performance, grandiose, and it's a megalomanous stage performance, a megalomanous project. That is the actual enterprise that is mentioned in the dollar bill and so on. But it is a performance. There are no good guys here. There's no heroes or villains in the organic sense. I mean, if you want to be a hero, be yourself, right? And yourself does not mean attaching to a story. So you find out that this story is false, and so you attach to the opposite, right? What you're doing there is basically, going around in the same stage play. Oh, I adhere to this one instead of that one, but I'm still within that box, right? No, there's an organic a way for humans to be here, and we can only have a chance to find that out if we leave this set of false memories, this set of blueprints that are applied and that we buy and make it our own. This is very important. They sell, but we buy. We make it, we give it life. It's like a Frankenstein monster, right? They may produce the corpse, but we imbue it with life. We give life to that corpse, right? We make it move. We make it have emotions. We make it have attachments. We make it have thoughts and so on and so forth. That is our energy. They have deceived us, yes, but we have allowed ourselves to be deceived. So this is something, it brings back responsibility to every single individual. If you reevaluate this and you assume back your responsibility without, This does not mean that you are responsible for everything. No, but you're responsible for that little bit, right? You have responsibility, you have agency, you have will. Because if you have responsibility, it means that you have free will. It means that you have actual willpower. And it means that things can change for you inside of you. If you are a victim of circumstance, a victim of swindlers, and you think that you had no choice at all in the matter, then, well, there's nothing to be done, right? Why look into things? And most people do that. Well, I can't change it. Why look into it, right? So, you see, basically to reawaken the ego, like I usually say, is done through a process of, re-establishing that we are responsible. To a certain degree, sure, we are not responsible for everything, but we have our degree of responsibility in everything that is going on and in how things have progressed time and time again cyclically. But every time there's a cycle, be it a small one or a bigger one, there is a loss of fuel. There is a loss of attention. There are a lot of, not a lot, but significant number of people, even though a smaller percentage in the whole perhaps, that entirely leave the false memories behind. And that is what feeds the system. That is what feeds this stage play. I mean, you remember in Rosencrantz and Guildenstern movie, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, where the actors said, well, we are nothing without an audience. We are the opposite of people. We need an audience to exist, right? So if the audience turns their backs on the performance, the actors stop existing. They're performing to who, right? They need the attention. That is what fuels the entire performance. Sorry about the rant.
No, you're absolutely spot on, and it's very interesting as well. Pulling this all back to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, where you even see the Pied Piper, right, and the director. And it's like what you're stating. You've got to have a buyer for the sale to go through. So it's in a sense we were. A lot of people feel that they were born to play certain roles, right? They have a calling yes. for the role, though that itself is almost it's a delusion, right? And so ultimately, what we're seeing is a collective delusion. We're seeing increasingly as the tower blueprint not formalizes itself, but makes itself known, it solidifies itself in society, and it becomes ever more apparent. It appears, and of course with the economy, going to a subscriber model, you will own nothing, be happy, that idea, it almost appears that we become little more than economic units, but we're not necessarily economic units producing profit. The profit itself, the production, the unit of production we are providing to the system is that of the act.
Absolutely.
We provide our will, our energy, we perform per the form. We bring the form into being, and it's like what you're saying. We all have a choice in the matter. But I wanted to bring up and touch upon something you stated, which is that after each cycle there appears to be a loss of momentum, potential, people who are willing to abide by the false narratives, the false memories. Do you believe this loss is perhaps, I don't know, I don't want to go into the metaphysical realm, but do you perhaps see it as a loss of the system in general, that the system is finite? Perhaps the artificial system or the organic system, or does the reset really entail, like what it says in the tin, a reset? Do we simply just fall back into the same regimented patterns of behavior and false memories?
Well, the way that these cycles are set up, they're set up like a machine, and every machine will have some wear and tear, right? So the efficiency of a machine will wear over time. The joints of the moving parts and so on and so forth. This is a metaphor, of course. Will begin to not be as efficient. Maybe they will start, not going well, not fitting well, and so that troubles the entire mechanism and so on and so forth. So in a similar way, I think that it's an absolutely natural loss that they expect and that they are able to deal with. That when I say able to deal with is that it's a loss that they are ready to accept. Acceptable losses, right? Of course, then what comes next is a phrase that we've heard several times before, which is to build back better. But that building back, I think, is always, because of that loss of fuel, always smaller in scope. And if we look at things, even in our own lifetimes, we see that's the expanse that existed in the unification of cultures and globalism nonetheless seems smaller than what the world was supposed to be, even in the story that they sold us, right? I'm trying to find words for this. It's like, because it can mean smaller in scope in terms of actual physical distance, so the actual land that is used as a definition of world may be reduced, but it's also in terms of scope. You see a cathedral supposedly built centuries ago, and you compare it to even a equivalent building nowadays, and you see the difference in scope. Even if it's taller, even if it's a taller building, the scope, the magnitude, the grandiousness of it all is diminished. So it's in that sense that I'm talking about. It's as if, the stories that were needed in cycles past needed to be far better told, if I could say it like that, than what they need now. So you approach a time where anything that is going on the world stage seems like an actual cartoon. I mean, look at Trump and tell me if this guy is not a cartoon character, right? He's got all the exaggerated. It's like a caricature, right? As if you would find in a comic book or a cartoon, right? So what I'm saying is that the reduction of scope can be both in the physical scope, but also in the psychological scope. It's like the story can now and will need now to dumb down in the next reset, whenever that is, because of that loss of fuel. There's less attention available at the end of each of these smaller cycles that try to gain time of the maintenance of that power, and to try to delay that organic reset. But when the organic reset comes, then I think that will be a very real thing that will be experienced unequivocally by everyone. Some will be able to deal with it, not necessarily talking about just the physical way, but psychologically. Others will go through the defeat eventually. But that all depends on where you stand and the internal responsibility that you've taken up to yourself.
That's interesting as well, the lesson in scope, and you're seeing it like what you brought up with the grandiosity of buildings. They're becoming lesser and lesser as the years go by. It almost appears as well from a systematic point of view, from the system's point of view, that, again, if this was a stage performance, and of course, you're as a performer, you've got to ensure that your performance it abides by what, not necessarily abides by, but it encapsulates, it covers, it accommodates the needs of the audience, and of course what the audience can actually understand and handle in terms of their attention span or their general knowledge or what have you. But it appears as well that the lessening grandiosity of buildings, for example, or the extremely harsh tones within art, the complete regression within art, especially in terms of the form of art, it appears though that accelerates that dumbing down process within this particular cycle. And furthermore as well, if you want to create a system, a stranglehold on power, a stranglehold on the predictability of society as well, and you can more easily steer it, then of course you want to diminish the horizons, or at least the scope of those horizons that people abide within. So again, you diminish their humanity, you diminish their potential of reconnecting once again with their ego, perhaps. So yeah, I agree with that too. And of course, remember as well, the stage performance in any setting really, it itself almost acts as a meta theatre. It exists, or it is a simulacrum of or an imitation of of the world itself. It's a bit like art. Art usually in periods gone by, it was an imitation of the world itself. Arguably, art, even modern art, is an imitation of the essence of the world rather than the form of it. So what we see from art, from performances, they themselves have controlled scopes. They have scopes that are smaller in stature than, of course, what they're attempting to mimic. And they have predictable outcomes, though, while you're caught up in the storm of it all, you're caught up in the hoo-ha of it all, it appears as though it's a natural, fluid outgrowth of action meeting response, that response generating new action, and thus the drama of it all. But in fact, it's something that's controlled. I wanted to touch upon as well this idea of the Holy Land blueprint, and how you see that. How do you define it? What is the concept behind that?
Well, first of all, I would like just to comment very briefly on something you said and ask you a question, which is, if you are in a position of, as a scriptwriter, and you want to reduce, of course you don't actually reduce the physical land, but you want to reduce the perception of available land in the world. What do you think, Silas, would be the best way to do it?
Well, it depends. What shape is the world? Well, one way to do it, of course, would be to have a giant ice wall. And of course, signing an Antarctic treaty. Of course, the Antarctic itself is the ice wall, and then controlling, of course, the passage to and from out, to and from the shell, if you will, of a world, this husk where the stage, if you will, of this earth, this world, where everything is occurring. It's interesting as well because you bring that up. I was just thinking, if you look at inertia, right, it even has the term earth in it, right? We exist in the ertia, right, the realm of earth, where of course, like inertia, it appears as though something, it perhaps appears as though something's going on, like the stage performance, but in fact there's nothing going on. We're in this sort of cyclical rotunda of a world, where momentum simply bleeds into nothingness, even if there is any momentum at all.
Yeah, well, that is a good answer, although it's already further down the line. Because, I think the simpler way is to say that the available world is a globe. And you say that it's a globe, so it means that if you go all the way to the east, you come back to the same point. And you say that there's nothing more. There's the North Pole, there's the South Pole, there's nothing more. And then you also sell the idea that, yeah, we can go to new land, but that new land is Mars, right? Is the moon, is Mars, is out there, is something that we need to cooperate to venture into, right? So that is how I think that is the easiest way to hide any land. If that land exists, the best way to hide is to hide it within a finite self-looping map of it. And so how many times has that happened? How many times has the Earth in perception shrunk? That is a question that I don't know the answer, but it's something to consider.
Yes, very true. Of course, after the New World was found, that was effectively it. We found
That's
it all.
it.
That's it. And it is similar to what you see of Shakespeare, the Globe Theatre. Perhaps that's why it was named as, of course it's circular, it's globular, I guess, but it's, you have this same idea. You're controlling the confines, you're controlling the perception, you're controlling the experience, effectively. And yeah.
But also, of course, as another alternative is to say, yes, that there is an ice wall, or a dome per se, or whatever it is, a barrier that prevents you from leaving. So the idea is not to say that it's a globe or to say that it's a domed this or whatever shape. The idea there is to limit the perception or the imagination that there is more land perhaps out there. And imagine that you have parallel sets of continents that have a similar world map, of course with their different continents, as we would do, and perhaps have their own blueprints going on and so on and so forth. But again, this is just for consideration. It was just a punch in there to leave for consideration. Regarding... Sorry.
I was just going to say really quickly, it's interesting, and just to underline the point that you mentioned there, it's almost as if the belief in the physical itself, again, like an egregore, it's all born in the mind. So, of course, the mind is almost elliptical, it's globular itself. If you control the confines of the mind, you control... Well, essentially, you control the horizons of possibility within the individual.
Absolutely. You got it. Bullseye. That is exactly my point. Of course, for consideration. I'm not saying that it is this and that there is more land, that I know there is. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that the presentation of the physical world limits already the presentation of the world to the mind. You understand? So it creates already a boundary that the mental character will not want to step out of. But anyway, so the Holy Land. Well, what I've found was that, if you look even at the historical record, it seems that there were several places that at one point or another were considered Holy Lands. Of course, nowadays we see Jerusalem in the Middle East. And, of course, in the historical records, we have this entire story about the Crusades and so on and so forth. But someone years ago brought to my attention a speculation about this very strange idea. I found it very strange at the time, which was, what if the actual Jerusalem as depicted was somewhere else? Okay. And of course, following this premise, I explored it, and there was a very compelling argument for Jerusalem to have been in Barcelona. This was Tom Carberry. Unfortunately, he disappeared. I've tried to email him. I've had some contact with him, tried to email him, and for years he disappeared. But that is very interesting because if you consider what happened in the historical records of the Iberian Peninsula, because you had the Muslims there, you had the Christians trying to gain back, supposedly, that land from the Muslims, and so on and so forth. And you have basically the same idea that you see in the Crusades in Jerusalem. And even Bach mentioned, Bach is, as you know, Muslim. He mentioned that there were other similarities, like I think there was one general in the Andalusian army that was left-handed, which was the same as one of the major generals in the Crusades in the Jerusalem in the Middle East. So there are several parallels here, which is very, very interesting too. But also, that is not the only one. For example, you go to check the history of Thailand, and you find that there was a city there that supposedly had been called Judea, and the empire of Thailand was at the time called Siam, or Sion. So you see that probably there was another blueprint going on there as well. And this brings the question of, okay, so were these all true at the same time? Or, what was happening here? And what I seem to, what seems most likely to me is that you apply onto a specific people and a specific location ready-made cultural and scenario blueprints that are applied there. You pit one population against another, give one their background story, give another their background story, pit them against each other and make them fight for a central point. That central point being that Holy Land, right? I mean, even in the historical record, you see, Constantinople used to be called Byzantium, right? And then you look at France, at the eastern France, and you see a very uncannily similar land there, smaller, called Besançon, right? Besançon in France, if you look at an aerial picture of Besançon, it has virtually the same shape that would be defined, in the records of what Besançon, or Byzantium, had, or Constantinople later on, then Istanbul. So, all of these things, were they, remnants of, previous blueprints applied onto them? I am not saying that it is for a fact, right? But the question arises, like, if you see scenarios that cyclically play out, and you see them cyclically even in your lifetime, how many times have you heard economic crisis, crisis in oil crisis, weather crisis, or climate crisis, and etc. Cyclically, you've always seen, the terrorist crisis, etc. So it's a cyclical thing. So if these things are cyclically within our lifetimes, if you see this in a bigger span of time, you can see that these smaller cycles can be expanded and applied upon cultures. Of course, if you apply a reset, you have to make sure that the newer generations are separated from the older generations so that they can be sold their new blueprint, their new cultural backgrounds, and so on and so forth. It's on a need-to-know basis. Of course, it's like saying, the director giving the parts, okay, so now you are this, and you are that, and you hate these guys, and you hate those guys, right? And you're going to fight for this central point because this central point is important for both of your traditions. And none of them had anything to do with it, right? This was just a scenario like you would do in an RPG game or a whatever game that you put, and people make it their own, right? They make it their own. They see the other as the enemy. They see the holy city as really holy, and they see all of these things, right? So why couldn't this have been applied several times in the past? Maybe in Barcelona. Listen, it's speculation, but maybe in Barcelona, maybe in Thailand, maybe elsewhere. Who knows? In China or in the Americas, for sure. You know what? How many holy cities have existed in the past, right? So it's something that I think is worthy of consideration. Because once we understand the scripts going on and the world stage performance going on, it makes sense that, you use the same scripts in several locations. You would, if you are able to perform smaller resets, when I say smaller is smaller in time, if you are able to perform these resets, you are able to repeat these iterations of the same play, right? If you play Macbeth, you can play Macbeth here, Macbeth there, Macbeth in China, Macbeth in Africa, Macbeth in America, so on and so forth. It's always Macbeth. You can even, of course, change a bit of the names of the characters. Certainly the actors will look different, but in its essence, in its outline, it's the same story, right? That's what I meant with blueprints, and in particular with this Holy City or Holy Land blueprint.
Absolutely, and again, like what you see, you brought up RPG games. You're foisted into these RPG worlds, and I don't know. Let's take The Witcher 3 for example. You've got, of course, you are the Witcher. You're part of this faction, right? Now again, before you booted up the computer, you were in that sort of zero order state where, of course, this world did not exist. There was no time or space. Then when you got into that world, it was ready made for you, effectively. There is, of course, player agency in some of these RPGs, but actually when you boil it down, and this is something that I find quite interesting, because a lot of RPG players they're not fully aware of this. I don't think. They always talk about player choice. But ultimately, there is no player choice. If you want to create a world that is believable for role-play experience, then you can't have a sandbox, which is that there's nothing there and you establish the game environment yourself, you establish the story yourself. You actually have to create, like what you're saying, this world that is established via factions. You may be in a faction. Well, for example, The Witcher 3, you're part of the Witcher faction. You can then diversify what faction you're part of, in terms of the kingdoms in the game. But they're all established as well, and they all have archetypal tones to them. So there's certain kingdoms, of course, that have real-world counterparts. For example, what's that kingdom's name? There's a kingdom in Witcher 3 that is almost stereotypically France, right? And there's a few others that are stereotypically of England and stereotypically of perhaps Hungary or more Slavic nations. But they have a certain tone and feel, and of course they colour the world themselves. But getting back to the stage performance, to the player character, they make their role believable. And they allow the player character, because these things are psychologically compatible, they allow the scenery to almost invoke an obedience, a blind obedience to one's role within that world. So I totally get what you're saying. And it's quite interesting regarding Eutea, or literally, the Dutch, when they got there, they called it Judea.
Yeah, Judea, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you have the kingdom of Siam, obviously Zion. So it's almost all of these histories, the traditions themselves, which again, where do traditions come from? Who knows, right? They're almost just delivered to us. Culture, even spiritual practices and rites and festivities, though of course across the world they are distinct, there appears to be a certain thread within each age that, like what you're saying, connects all of these factions, a bit like an RPG game, and that they are geographical and temporal, performative cliches, effectively. And this brings us to what we were discussing previously regarding Shakespeare, that Shakespeare almost invented the entire English identity, the British identity really, but the English identity, which would of course later encapsulate and incorporate and encroach upon the Scots, Irish and Welsh identity. It became, of course, English became the lingua franca of all of our nations, and effectively if you speak the language and you speak the language on a daily basis, then eventually you internalize the archetype of that language itself. You become English, effectively. So, yeah, I don't know if you have any comments upon that.
Well, it was to me obvious that it was done, and right after in the historical record, right after it was the actual unification of what is now known as the United Kingdom, right? So, and that needed to have a new language that it seems that, of course, the Old English was not going to cut it, and of course, the first unification in your particular neck of the woods was the United Kingdom, but the idea was already to expand that eventually into the globalization that we see from there forth, right? And so even when we look at the world now, there's of course this other side of resistance to globalization that is also stereotypical, because it holds on to supposed traditions as if they were the ultimate truth. So it's as if, okay, you say the English destroyed the unification with England destroyed Scottish culture, right? So what are you going to do? You're going to say that, no, I am going to uphold Scottish culture to my dying breath, right? What are you doing? You're doing the defense of also a blueprint, a cultural blueprint that was applied upon that particular people, that particular land delineation, that wasn't true to begin with either, right? And so with this, you're able to, control both sides, because you're able to, on the one hand, promote the construction of the Tower of Babel, and on the other hand, promote the enactment of this necessary script part of those that go and try to confuse and destroy the construction of the Tower of Babel. But eventually, all the toys will go back into the box, right? And start over. And when it starts over, there's no memory there. So they have to provide a memory to give you a direct timeline to antiquity, like they do now. I think that most of the historical record that we have, for our foundational past, can't be possibly true. It's a story given to fill in blanks. You need to reason a continuous line from the ancient past to, legitimize, like we said before, to legitimize where you stand now. But if you understand that where you are now is not legitimate, then you don't need history in that regard, because you understand that all parts in those records are the same part. It's all the troupe of actors, like I said, seen in the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern movie. It's a troupe of actors playing both sides, enacting battles, enacting conflict, enacting love, enacting religious beliefs, enacting emotions, but they're all just acting. And some of them are not even aware of the entire script. Of course they're not. This is on a need-to-know basis. If it would be too unpredictable for every actor in the play to know the entire thing. No, they don't need to know. They need to know their part, do it well, and be rewarded for it. And that's why you see, rewards for accomplishments that are not necessarily for the betterment of mankind, right? So it's awards and rewards and gifts given to prize the enactment of a certain part that was needed in the play, even if in opposition. You could be playing the opposition to a specific plan and still be rewarded. How do you explain that? How can the other side rewards a rebel? It rewards a rebel because that rebel was playing your side as well. It was playing a part in your play. It's as simple as that. And that's why the actors keep doing it, in my opinion.
And they go through a character development as well. You brought the rebel, of course. America, in fact, the Americans for, I think, all the way up to about the 1830s, they were still referred to by British gentlemen as literally the rebels. And it was only later on that, of course, relations were supposedly stabilized, but the rebel itself became the oppressor in many respects. So you see character development to occur within these grander civilizational or national characters. And another thing we see in terms of the blueprint of the Holy Land, and it just came to my mind there, was the 19th century British Israelism. And we have many songs where, well, we have William Blake, where his famous poem, I think it was a poem, yes, and did those feet in ancient time, or it's also known as just simply Jerusalem. And this ties in with British Zionism as well, but you see that they're almost linking the British, which is, I mean, it's even interesting, the term British, because it's obviously the Hebrew for the people of the covenant, Brit, but they're likening England to Jerusalem. They're likening the British to the Israelites. So you're seeing the same recurring blueprint there. And you see it within the US as well, that, of course, who founded the US, the United States as we know it, as a government, as a nation. Obviously previous to the Native Americans were there, but America itself was founded by the Pilgrims. And if you look all the way along that eastern seaboard, you'll see all the way really into the Midwest, quite, far into Ohio and even Montana, you'll see interesting Hebrew names for mountains that are of course taken from Old Testament lore. And these pilgrims had in their mind this manifest destiny. They almost had this religious zeal to recreate what they saw as almost a manifested religious mission conducted by and for them, the chosen people, if you will.
Of course.
You even see it during the Mexican-American War. There was actually individuals who stated, yeah, we should just take all of Mexico because we are the chosen people, and we must, it's essentially like the Israelites conquering the Amalekites or wiping out the Canaanites. So these tropes seem to constantly flare up. these cliches. So what you're stating is absolutely correct. Even on the short term, in terms of short-term history, we're even still living it, arguably. Even though, of course, the West has undergone a certain character development itself in recent times, there's still that idea that the Anglosphere is in charge, and we must be in charge. It's like this idea of the chosen people. London itself is almost, I mean, it appears to be almost like a chosen city. Like in the UK, London...
It's the new Vatican, City of London, the new Vatican,
Yeah, Washington DC as well, yeah.
Yes.
No, you're totally on point. Yeah, totally on point, man. I don't know if you have any comments to make to that.
Well, even in recent years, I don't know if it was last year or something, I saw a video, I think it was on IPS at the time, of, I think it was a lady that was a Trump supporter at the time. And she was stating, in a very skewed way, that the Southern Trump supporters or something like that were the Israelites. And so that with the eclipse, those two eclipses that made the X.
Yes.
That the eclipses were a sign from God that they would return the promised land to the chosen people and so on and so forth. I mean, that blueprint is still ongoing, and it's applied even in our lifetimes in several places, right? Now imagine that you can apply a reset at some point, that you can relocate people, that you can somehow separate generations, and you have, hotspots of young generation children ready to be indoctrinated. You can produce whatever scenario you want. And with history, with timelines, with everything, they will incorporate it and make it theirs if they are still in their development phases and are defenseless in psychic terms, right? Because it may be harder to convince adults after a certain establishment of psychic foundation, let's say, but for children it's much easier, right? But after a while, those children will have chances to leave that script. And often what happens is that, no, they contribute to it. They truly invest themselves into it, and they build these scenarios up. They are the actual builders, the builders of the hive, for whatever culture they are sold in that regard. Because again, for everyone that sells, someone buys. They wouldn't do what they do without the cooperation of those who believe. So yeah, that would be my comment, man.
Well, even the belief is to literally, it's to be the lie, is it not?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's, and like what you mentioned with the hive, I mean, the drone, even the royalty themselves are unaware of their grander position within both the hive and perhaps what's going on if they're kept in these artificial, those large-scale hives where they produce honey for obviously humans. So they're unaware of that. But the drones and all of them, they're diligently going about. They're acting, if you will, to make the honey. So. Of course, they have no idea where this honey is going to once it's periodically taken out of the various segments, perhaps representative of the factions and the nations, and each nation is stripped mined, if you will, of this honey that has been diligently made over the ensuing generations of drones and royalty.
Just a comment there, just for for consideration for you and for those listening. How old is the U.S.?
It's
Like,
actually,
according to historical record.
according to historical record, it will be 250 years next year.
Right. So for
Yeah.
a country that is 250 years, look at how much its own story is ingrained in its people, right? How it got ingrained with only 250 years, and how it's given legitimacy as if, and we're talking about an historical record that was put and written like that, right? So if that is possible for 250 years, imagine that you believe, in the case, for example, of Portugal, that Portugal is almost 1,000 years, right? Imagine for, a country that might be even older than that, or a culture that might be even older than that. How ingrained does it become if you believe that, your culture has been there for thousands and thousands of years, And if this is possible for 250 years, imagine if you, believe that you are the chosen people because you've been here since the beginning of the world. Right? This is just for consideration in terms of the psychological effects of these false memories and of these stories. This is important in that regard, because I'm not saying that it is this or that culture that is the chosen. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is the effect that these stories have, that these false memories have. And that is important for consideration. Because when we look at Americans, how they have it ingrained in them, the Americanness, right? And of course there are, one thing is to be a Southerner, another to be a Northerner, one thing is West Coast, another is East Coast, one thing is, this state or that state. Yes, there are differences, but in general, there is an Americanness, right? That was built supposedly 250 years. If this happened organically, would 250 years suffice for that? No, it was implanted in the same way that you implant the blueprint of Portugal, in the same way that you implant the blueprint of, Egypt or China or Japan, right? Or Scotland or England, right? It had to be fabricated more or less around the same time, in my opinion.
Yes, and you even see, for example, firstly, the American identity. I mean, of course, what we have to understand, it was only maybe, probably less than 5% of I believe that's the estimate, 5% of the 13 colonies' population were radically and emphatically patriots, right? Rebels, as the British would call them. There was another 15% who got embroiled in the war, but they got embroiled for other reasons. They weren't staunchly patriotic. They weren't of that ideology. So they would have still, again, you're talking about probably 90% of the population would have still seen themselves as either, Scottish, English, Irish, Welsh, Dutch, whatever,
French,
Spanish. Yeah, Spanish, whatever population was there. Mostly they would have seen themselves as English. Like what you're saying, how did that develop? How did that completely transition and change? Well, of course, we have things like the historical event of the Evacuation Day, where after I think it was in 1782, 83, if I recall correctly, essentially after the military campaigning of the American Revolutionary War was concluded, all of the loyalists were literally kicked out. They were sent to Canada. So you had a cultural change there. But even then, how did this idea, this noble lie, this pious fiction of the American itself as an identity establish itself? Because, like what you're saying, unlike a lot of the European countries, European nations, there wasn't really all they really had was liberty, that idea. And from that idea, they developed all of this, like what you're saying, this chosen people notion, where it's manifest destiny, this religious zeal, and moreover as well, they developed essentially a continental-wide national identity. It's completely baffling in less than 249 years.
Yeah.
Totally baffling.
Yeah, it's impossible, basically. That's what I'm trying to say.
Totally, yeah.
It's impossible organically to happen. So it must have been a blueprint application. And this is, of course, if we assume that is the correct date. It may be or may not. I mean, we're speculating. I don't have their manual. But, for example, in the 1700s, in 1755, supposedly a major earthquake happened in Lisbon, where, basically the city was destroyed, with the exception of a few very important buildings. You were in one when you came visit. The Jerônimos survived, supposedly that earthquake. And the city was then rebuilt with a completely different schematic, let's say. It was clearly Masonic in nature and international in scope. So it seems like, it was a very fertile period, the 1700s. A very fertile period in their historical records for a lot of change in regards to several places at the same time to externalize themselves. Because there were, for example, changes going on in Japan too during that time that reflected supposedly a century later. But there was the beginning of the externalization and of the change in culture. That culture that was also put there in the first place. So it was not an organic thing that was replaced by a falsehood. It was one false thing replaced by another false thing, right? And this is very, very important to understand, because we will only have the opportunity to approach the organic truth if we do not replace one false thing by another false thing. There's this tendency of, when you discover something is false, to hold on to another story, right? Oh, I discovered that the globe is false, right? So therefore I'm a flat earther now, right? So what are you doing? You are basically moving from one story to another story that was provided for you as well, right? And when you do that, you are still within the acceptable box. What you have to do is leave it blank. Oh, I found that this is a lie. I don't know what it is. And then you look and observe and wait. And be patient, wait. Because your internal ego, that part of you that is in contact with your essential self, and at the same time in contact with your mental character, will eventually fill that blank with something that is organic. It may not tell you what the shape of the world is. It may not tell you what, language was there before, or it may not tell you which parts of history are this or which parts of history are that, but it will tell you something about yourself. And that is all we're here to do, really, is to be ourselves, So it is important to look at these things not from the perspective of what actually happened in history, because it's, look at history as in most of it, a stage performance. So it is not that essential to discover that. What is essential is to discover who you are. And who you are is not a character in a play, is not a story that you embody and make it your own and give life to. Who you are is someone organic, living. You are not a name, you are not a nationality, you are not a language that you speak. You are an individual, an organic individual that has worth as an individual, and the contribution as well as an individual. But that can only happen if we observe these things, not for, trying to discover what actually happened, because you will never know. What we can know is who we are. That is what we can surely know. The rest, sure, we can speculate, but mostly we have to go by the negation, right? We can only see what isn't true, and then leave it blank. That is my take on that.
And I think that's a good place to end off our discussion. Essentially, we've come full circle. That idea in Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead, that actors we're the opposite of people, but in fact, we are people and we're the opposite of actors.
Yes, and listen, even the ending of that movie is very significant, because they are about to be hanged due to the replacement of the letter that they were bringing to the King of England. That instead of killing Hamlet, the letter was altered by Hamlet for them to be killed. And the smarter one between Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, which was Guildenstern, although they mix up the names on purpose as a sort of recurring joke in the movie, he realizes, well, we were playing a part all this time. We were playing a script all this time, a script that they paid for with the metaphorical gold coin that they give to the troupe of actors. And there must have been a time when we could have said no. And this is the most important sentence ever in the movie, in the entire movie. Because they went through their script, they reacted to the intervenience there, they reacted to the events, right? But they never, came up with just saying, hang on, I'm not going with this. This is ridiculous. I mean, the entire movie, the entire script is ridiculous from their point of view, and they never said no, right? And this is that would be the climax of that individual manifestation. It would be to say no to that specific part and then allow things to manifest themselves by the organic. So absolutely, man.
An absolutely fascinating discussion, man. And we'll have to do a discussion on Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps
I agree.
We'll have the movie play in while we'll discuss the various topics within it, because I mean that movie pretty much sums up what we're discussing here and what we've discussed for across the false memories, false characters, and of course, or the mental characters, and of course the blueprints themselves.
Mm-hmm. And the movie was put there by the scriptwriters too, so they know what they were doing. They have to create this escape valve.
Yeah. A completely
some pressure.
an obscure and a totally obscure movie, an obscure escape valve, but to those who without have eyes to see, obviously it does provide a sense of clarity and an escape, like what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So with that, man, do you have any closing statements you would like to make?
No, just that as usual in our conversations, this was a pleasure, and I hope that I was able to further explain, at least a bit better, these concepts that I observe. And looking forward to the release of the new tarot episode that will be soon, and also any further discussions, be it on Rosencrantz or any other topics that may emerge between us, and anything for the future, that may come up. Real pleasure.
Well, likewise, yeah. It's always a pleasure speaking with you. I always learn things when I talk to you, which is why I keep coming back to have discussions with you. But yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure, and the audience can look out for more discussions, especially in terms of Guildenstern and Rosencrantz, or Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. I always get it mixed up. But yeah,
they do so as a recurring joke in the movie anyway. So
I get it mixed up as well. So it's the recurring joke is on me. But with that, I thank you, man.